Let me tell you about a patient I will call Dorothy. Dorothy was 71 years old. She had been on blood pressure medication for 11 years, 2 different pills, taken every morning without fail, and every time she came into my office, her blood pressure was still sitting at 158/94, sometimes higher. Her medication had been adjusted 3 times. A fourth pill had been discussed. She was frustrated. Her doctors were frustrated. And Dorothy, who was sharp and determined, and deeply tired of feeling like her body was something that needed to be managed rather than lived in, sat across from me one afternoon and said something I have never forgotten. She said, "Doctor, I am doing everything I am told, and nothing is working. Is there anything I am actually allowed to do for myself?" That question stopped me cold, because the honest answer was yes, there was, and it had been sitting on her kitchen table every single day. My name is Dr. Patricia Mensah. I am an internal medicine physician and clinical nutritionist. I have spent 17 years working specifically with older adults on cardiovascular health. And today I want to give you the answer I gave Dorothy, the practical, specific, science-backed truth about how food, the right food eaten the right way, can move blood pressure numbers in ways that genuinely surprise people, including sometimes their doctors. Before we get into the 5 approaches, I need to give you some context that most patients never receive, because understanding why food affects blood pressure so powerfully makes the difference between following advice casually and following it with real commitment. Your blood pressure is not simply a number that your medication controls or fails to control. It is the result of a dynamic system involving your blood vessels, your kidneys, your nervous system, your hormones, and the chemistry of everything you consume. When a blood pressure medication works, it is intervening in one part of that system, usually just one. But food, the right combination of nutrients and compounds found in whole foods, can simultaneously affect multiple parts of that system at once. That is not a small thing. That is actually a significant pharmacological advantage that most people are sitting on top of without realizing it. Here is what is happening in the body of a senior with high blood pressure that food can directly address. First, the blood vessels themselves. As we age, arterial walls lose elasticity. They stiffen. They become less able to expand and contract with each heartbeat. When stiff arteries cannot flex, pressure builds. Certain food compounds, specifically dietary nitrates and specific flavonoids, have been shown in clinical trials to directly improve arterial flexibility within weeks of consistent consumption. Second, sodium and potassium balance. Your kidneys regulate blood pressure in part by managing how much sodium and water are retained in the body. When sodium is high and potassium is low, the kidneys hold on to more fluid, blood volume increases, and pressure rises. This balance is almost universally disrupted in the typical diet of adults over 60. And it can be corrected without a prescription. Third, the renin-angiotensin system. This is the hormonal cascade that controls blood vessel constriction. Certain food compounds, particularly peptides found in specific protein sources, and bioactive compounds in particular vegetables, act on this system in ways that genuinely parallel the mechanism of common blood pressure medications, not as powerfully in isolation, but meaningfully and without side effects. Fourth, chronic low-grade inflammation. Inflamed arterial walls are stiffer, narrower, and more reactive to pressure fluctuations. The anti-inflammatory potential of certain foods is not a wellness trend. It is a documented, measurable clinical reality. Understanding these 4 pathways is important because each of the 5 food approaches I am about to share with you targets one or more of them specifically. This is not general healthy eating advice. This is targeted nutritional intervention. Dorothy lowered her systolic blood pressure by 19 points over 14 weeks, using these approaches alongside her existing medication. 19 points. Without adding a 4th pill, without a single side effect, with food she bought at her local grocery store. Let me show you exactly what she did. Number 1. Beetroot and leafy greens. The nitrate strategy. I want to start here because the science behind this one is among the most robust in all of nutritional cardiology, and yet it remains almost entirely unknown to the general public. Certain vegetables, particularly beetroot, spinach, arugula, Swiss chard, and celery, are extraordinarily rich in dietary nitrates. When you consume these vegetables, bacteria in your mouth and enzymes in your digestive system convert those nitrates into nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is one of the most powerful natural vasodilators known to medicine. Vasodilation means your blood vessels open wider. When vessels expand, resistance drops. When resistance drops, blood pressure falls. A landmark meta-analysis published in the journal Hypertension analyzed 22 randomized controlled trials on dietary nitrate and blood pressure. The conclusion was striking. Consistent consumption of nitrate-rich vegetables produced an average reduction of 4.4 millimeters of mercury in systolic blood pressure and 1.1 millimeters in diastolic pressure. And in patients who already had elevated blood pressure, the effect was significantly greater than in people with normal readings, meaning the people who need it most benefit from it most. Beetroot juice specifically has been studied extensively. A study from Queen Mary University of London found that 1 cup of beetroot juice daily reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 8 points in patients with hypertension. 8 points from a single daily habit. Now I know what some of you are thinking. Beetroot juice is not exactly a pleasure to drink, and that is fair. But here is the practical reality. You do not need juice. You need regular, consistent consumption of these vegetables in any form. Roasted beets added to a salad, a generous handful of spinach cooked into eggs in the morning, arugula used as a base instead of iceberg lettuce, celery eaten as a snack in the afternoon. The key word is consistent. The nitric oxide pathway requires regular dietary input to maintain its effect. 1 serving of beetroot a week does nothing measurable. Daily or near daily consumption of nitrate-rich vegetables creates a sustained physiological change. Dorothy started adding half a cup of cooked spinach to her breakfast every morning. She began eating a small beet salad 3 times a week, and she replaced her afternoon crackers with celery sticks and almond butter. That was it. No dramatic overhaul. Just strategic, consistent placement of the right vegetables into meals she was already eating. Number 2. Potassium-rich foods. Rebalancing. What medication cannot fully fix, this is the one that frustrates me most when I think about how rarely it is explained to patients. Your kidneys are constantly making decisions about how much sodium to keep in your body and how much to excrete. And the single most powerful dietary signal that tells the kidneys to release sodium and reduce fluid retention is potassium. When potassium intake is high, the kidneys excrete more sodium. When sodium is excreted, fluid volume drops. When fluid volume drops, blood pressure falls. This is not a theory. It is a well-established physiological mechanism, and it explains why the DASH diet, the dietary approaches to stop hypertension, which is the most extensively studied dietary pattern for blood pressure in the world, is not primarily a low-sodium diet. It is a high-potassium diet. The reduction in sodium is secondary. The increase in potassium is the engine. The recommended potassium intake for adults is approximately 4,700 milligrams per day. The average American over 60 consumes roughly 2,500 milligrams. That gap, nearly 2,200 milligrams of missing potassium every single day, is a direct contributor to elevated blood pressure in a significant percentage of older adults. Now, many seniors have been told to be careful with potassium because of kidney function or certain medications, particularly ACE inhibitors and potassium-sparing diuretics. This caution is legitimate and important. Please discuss your specific situation with your doctor before dramatically increasing potassium intake. I want to be clear about that. But for people without those contraindications, the potassium-rich foods that most powerfully address this gap are specific and accessible. Avocado is exceptional. 1 medium avocado contains approximately 975 milligrams of potassium. Adding half an avocado to lunch 4 days a week makes a measurable difference in potassium balance. Sweet potato is another remarkable source. 1 medium baked sweet potato with the skin contains over 900 milligrams. White beans, often overlooked, contain more potassium per serving than a banana. Half a cup of white beans provides approximately 500 milligrams. And salmon, which I will discuss further in a moment, provides both potassium and the omega-3 fatty acids that address arterial inflammation simultaneously. The banana is the potassium food everyone knows about. It is a decent source, but it is far from the most powerful one. If you are serious about using potassium to support your blood pressure, focus on avocado, sweet potato, white beans, lentils, and leafy greens rather than limiting yourself to bananas. Number 3, fatty fish and flaxseed. The inflammation pathway. I mentioned earlier that chronic low-grade inflammation is one of the primary drivers of arterial stiffness and elevated blood pressure in older adults. Now I want to tell you specifically what to eat to address it. Omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA found in fatty fish, are among the most extensively studied anti-inflammatory compounds in nutritional science. Their effect on the cardiovascular system is not limited to cholesterol. Their direct impact on blood pressure through reduction of arterial inflammation and improvement of endothelial function, the function of the cells lining your blood vessel walls, is well documented. A comprehensive meta-analysis published in the Journal of the American Heart Association analyzed 71 randomized controlled trials on omega-3 fatty acids and blood pressure. The combined data showed that regular omega-3 consumption reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 4.5 millimeters and diastolic by 3.0 millimeters in hypertensive patients, and higher doses produced proportionally greater reductions. The fatty fish highest in EPA and DHA are salmon, mackerel, sardines, herring, and trout. 2 to 3 servings per week of these fish provides a therapeutic level of omega-3 intake for most adults, and sardines specifically, which are inexpensive, widely available, and often underappreciated, are among the single most nutrient-dense foods available for cardiovascular health. They provide omega-3s, potassium, calcium, and vitamin D in a single small serving. For patients who do not eat fish Ground flaxseed is the most bioavailable plant-based source of omega-3 fatty acids. 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed daily, stirred into oatmeal, blended into a smoothie, or mixed into yogurt, provides a meaningful anti-inflammatory dose. It also provides lignans, compounds that have independently been shown in clinical studies to reduce systolic blood pressure by a clinically significant margin in hypertensive patients. A study from the Canadian Centre for Agri-Food Research found that patients who consumed 30 grams of milled flaxseed daily for 6 months experienced an average systolic blood pressure reduction of 10 millimeters. 10 millimeters. From a tablespoon and a half of ground flaxseed in their morning oatmeal, Dorothy added 2 tablespoons of ground flaxseed to her breakfast every morning. She began eating salmon twice a week and a tin of sardines once a week. Small changes, sustained over weeks. The cumulative effect on her arterial inflammation was reflected in her blood pressure readings within the first month. Number 4. Dark chocolate and berries. The flavonoid strategy. I want to pause here because this is the point in my patient conversations where people look at me with genuine suspicion. Dark chocolate and berries for blood pressure. It sounds more like a wish list than a medical recommendation. But the science here is among the most replicated in nutritional cardiology. And I want to give you the specifics so you understand exactly why this works. Flavonoids are bioactive compounds found in high concentrations in dark chocolate, blueberries, strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, and certain other plant foods. A specific class of flavonoids called flavin-3-ols, found in particularly high concentrations in dark chocolate and blueberries, activates the same nitric oxide pathway as the dietary nitrates in beets and leafy greens. They stimulate endothelial cells to produce nitric oxide, which dilates blood vessels and reduces pressure. A meta-analysis of 19 randomized controlled trials on flavonoid-rich cocoa and blood pressure found an average reduction of 3.2 millimeters systolic and 2.0 millimeters diastolic in hypertensive patients, not in young healthy volunteers, in patients with elevated blood pressure, which is the population where the effect is consistently strongest. But here is where the details matter enormously. Not all chocolate produces this effect. The flavonoid content of chocolate is inversely related to how much it has been processed. Milk chocolate has almost none of the therapeutic flavonoid activity. White chocolate has none at all. The chocolate that produces measurable blood pressure benefits is dark chocolate with a cocoa content of 70% or higher, consumed in modest portions of approximately 20 to 30 grams, roughly 1 to 2 small squares, daily. That is not a large quantity. It is not a license to eat chocolate freely. But 1 to 2 squares of 70% or higher dark chocolate daily is a documented, replicable, pleasurable nutritional intervention for blood pressure, and it is one that most of my patients have absolutely no objection to adopting. Blueberries deserve special mention in this category. A clinical trial from Florida State University followed postmenopausal women with pre-hypertension and hypertension who consumed 22 grams of freeze-dried blueberry powder daily for 8 weeks. The result was an average reduction of 7 millimeters in systolic blood pressure and 5 millimeters in diastolic, 7 and 5, from blueberries. Fresh or frozen blueberries, approximately half a cup to 1 cup daily, provide comparable flavonoid content to the freeze-dried powder used in research. This is one of the most accessible and enjoyable dietary interventions available for blood pressure management in older adults, and it combines beautifully with the ground flaxseed and morning oatmeal, creating a single breakfast habit that addresses multiple cardiovascular pathways simultaneously. Number 5. Garlic, the ancient medicine with modern evidence. I have saved this one for last because it is the most surprising to people, and because the evidence behind it is more substantial than almost anyone expects. Garlic has been used medicinally for thousands of years across virtually every culture on Earth. For most of modern medicine's history, this was dismissed as folklore. Then researchers started actually measuring what garlic does to blood vessels, and what they found was not folklore. Garlic contains a compound called allicin, produced when raw garlic is crushed or chopped. Allicin and its metabolic derivatives have multiple documented effects on the cardiovascular system. They reduce the activity of angiotensin-converting enzyme, exactly the same mechanism targeted by a major class of blood pressure medications called ACE inhibitors. They stimulate hydrogen sulfide production in blood vessel cells, causing direct relaxation and dilation of arterial walls, and they reduce platelet aggregation, lowering the tendency of blood to clot in ways that stress the circulatory system. A meta-analysis published in the Journal of Nutrition analyzed 12 randomized controlled trials specifically in patients with hypertension. The conclusion was clinically meaningful. Garlic supplementation or consistent dietary garlic consumption reduced systolic blood pressure by an average of 8.3 millimeters and diastolic by 5.5 millimeters in hypertensive patients. 8.3 over 5.5. Those are numbers that many blood pressure medications would be proud to claim. The practical application requires understanding one important detail. The allicin in garlic is activated by the enzyme alliinase when the cell walls are broken. This reaction requires approximately 10 minutes after crushing or chopping before the allicin is fully formed. Cooking garlic immediately after cutting it deactivates the enzyme before the allicin can form. So the most therapeutically active way to consume garlic is to crush or chop it, wait 10 minutes, and then add it to cooking or consume it raw. 2 to 4 cloves of garlic daily. Prepared this way, provides a therapeutic level of allicin activity. This can be incorporated into salad dressings, mixed into cooked vegetables after they come off the heat, or stirred into hummus or yogurt-based dips. For people who find raw garlic difficult on the stomach, aged garlic extract supplements have been shown in clinical trials to provide comparable blood pressure benefits with significantly better digestive tolerance. Dorothy was initially skeptical about garlic. She added 2 crushed cloves to her salad dressing every day. Within 3 weeks, she stopped noticing the taste. Within 8 weeks, her cardiologist was asking what she had changed. Now let me bring all 5 of these together into something practical you can actually use starting tomorrow. The 5 food strategies we have covered today each target a specific physiological pathway that drives elevated blood pressure in older adults. Beetroot and leafy greens activate the nitric oxide pathway and dilate arterial walls directly. Potassium-rich foods rebalance the sodium-potassium ratio that controls how much fluid your kidneys retain. Fatty fish and flaxseed reduce chronic arterial inflammation and improve endothelial function. Dark chocolate and berries stimulate flavonoid-driven nitric oxide production and reduce oxidative stress in blood vessel walls. And garlic directly inhibits the hormonal cascade that constricts blood vessels. None of these requires you to overhaul your entire diet overnight. None of them requires expensive supplements or specialty health food stores. And none of them conflicts with blood pressure medication. In fact, used alongside medication under your doctor's supervision, they can enhance its effectiveness significantly. The approach that works is the one you actually sustain. So start with one. Just one. The easiest one. The one that fits most naturally into what you already eat. Add it consistently for 2 weeks. Then add a second. Build the pattern gradually, because the goal is not a perfect diet for one impressive week. The goal is a meaningfully better dietary pattern for the rest of your life. Dorothy did not change everything at once. She changed one thing at a time, every 2 to 3 weeks, until her daily eating looked substantially different from where it had started. And 14 weeks later, she sat across from me, and her blood pressure read 139/82. Not perfect, but 19 points lower than where she had been for 11 years, without a new prescription. She looked at me and said, "I wish someone had told me this a decade ago." I am telling you now, if this gave you something specific and actionable that you are going to bring into your kitchen this week, share it with someone you care about who is managing blood pressure. And tell me in the comments, which of these 5 are you going to try first? I read every single response. Take care of yourselves. Your next meal is an opportunity. Use it.